week has gone in a direction which I didn't necessarily plan to take last week until I read on Friday last week about the Patriot Coal decision in St. Louis, and that has pretty well sparked our program. But in the process, we covered some things, in specifically talking about corporations in America's legal history that we had touched upon before. And one of the things that I've thought about, I've thought a lot about the last couple of programs, especially as I was thinking about today, because theoretically, hopefully, we'll bring this issue to a logical conclusion today. That doesn't mean that we're going to fix anything, but it just means we'll be ready to move on to something else at the start of our new week next week. But be that as it may, I thought a lot about today's program and where we've come and what we're doing. And one of the things that I feel pretty good about is the fact when we looked at McCulloch versus Maryland and Dartmouth College versus Woodward before, we looked at them as Supreme Court cases, as cases which were heard and decided in their own place and time, which was obviously in the early 19th century under Chief Justice John Marshall. But the whole idea for our program, for the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution in the first place, is not only to focus on the content of the Constitution and its meaning, but more importantly, and I say that advisedly because I think most people that are tuning in are not graduate students in American history. They aren't. They could be. Many people could be attorneys, potential attorneys that are tuned in. But that's not the point. For most people that would be listening to this particular program, these are people that just have an interest in what's going on in the world around them. Many times they see, as I do, they see issues and concerns and problems which, from their perspective, don't seem to be being addressed. In fact, there is some sense, I know among you, because there is with me as well, there's sometimes a sense that the people that we would look to address these problems really don't even recognize them as problems. Or if they do, they really don't understand the full implication of the issue at hand. And obviously, if you don't really see the full implications of a particular issue, then you obviously don't recognize the depth of the problem. And so, therefore, you're not going to get a meaningful solution to it. And in thinking about our last few programs, as I was putting things together for today, and basically what I mean is trying to get my head on straight and wrap my arms around some of this stuff. I felt pretty good because what we've ended up doing, not necessarily by intent, by design, but indeed it has happened, is we have focused on an issue which is happening right now, which relates to the very material that we're covering. And it seems to me that we can talk from now till doomsday about potential implications, about hypothetical situations. But when we're able to talk about a real situation that's affecting real people, as the Patriot Coal decision is, then I think it brings into clearer focus for many folks why this stuff is so darn important. Why it is that we really do have to spend more time examining the nature of our political system, the nature of our legal system, and how it affects people. Because ultimately, that's what this is all about. And it seems to me one of the major problems that students have in the study of history itself is that for many of them, they don't see any relevance between what happened in the past and what's going on in their own lives. And good teachers do try to make those connections. And I would say, just as an aside, that in the grant program that we've been working on here for the last 4 years now, and we're just winding up here in southern West Virginia, working with history teachers. That's one of the goals, one of the things that we wanted our teachers to realize, is that for most students, especially young students, K through 12 students, coming into the classroom and required to study history, world history, United States history, whatever the specific topic is. The one thing that I think every teacher has to realize and has to take seriously is the fact that for most students, the content that these students are going to be introduced to is not content that they feel, that these students feel or appreciate, that they have any link or any connection to at all. It's totally alien to them. From their perspective, there's no reason to know this. Why should we know this? The whole basis of our grant is that if our teachers can't answer that question, then it goes unanswered. And given the kind of performance that we are seeing all over the country in many of our history classrooms, as well as other subjects as well, school K through 12 education generally, it seems to me, is demonstrating that we have some real challenges and some real problems in our nation. But you know, if the poor performance is in part at least a statement about the inability of students to see relevance in what it is they're being asked to learn and understand. In fact, too often it's understand is not even part of it, just learn. And so the whole idea, the reason that we entitled our program PRISM is because conceptually what we had envisioned was that teachers would try to take local issues and use them as a prism, because these would be issues that students could relate to, that they could understand, that had meaning in their day-to-day lives. And if students could take these local issues that students knew and use them as a bridge to study material that is much more distant and much less related to the individual student. If the instructors, if teachers can present material in such a way that students look at the bigger issues through the prism of more local issues that they are comfortable with and they're familiar with, then the assumption is that that students will be able to engage much more easily the content which in and of itself is alien to them. And that's why we called it PRISM, because we were basically saying that we can look at national issues and international issues from a local perspective. If we can see a connection, if we can see a relationship, if understanding one helps us to grasp the significance of the other, then we have basically accomplished a tremendous amount that I believe, is going to be reflected in overall student performance. Students are going to do better because they see and understand the relevance of the information and how it affects them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Seems to make perfect sense, but it's not happening a whole lot. And I think we need to, all of us, understand that. So I welcome you to today's program, and I feel, pretty good about the fact that some of the content that we've looked at, which seems to have meaning only in the early 19th century and the late 18th century, has suddenly come to life and is affecting something that's going on right now with the Patriot coal situation. I noticed in our local paper this morning there was a news report that there were demonstrations, coal miners, the UMW members from around the country were demonstrating in St. Louis against this decision. And those interviewed in the story we're making the case that we're not going away. This is too important. I believe it is too important. But again, what makes it overly important is that I believe the potential of it goes way beyond mining, goes way beyond Appalachia, and has potential up and down the line in terms of the way corporate employees treat their employees. And especially when these employees have given a number of years and are about to or have already retired and are dependent on employee goodwill, if you will, for their to enjoy their retirement years and basically can expect meaningful health care, meaningful health insurance coverage for the years when they most likely will need it most. I invite you to participate actively in our program. I say this every day, and I want you to know that I mean it. Yesterday we had a caller from up in New York State, John, and I really appreciate so much that he took the time to call. It's very, very encouraging, it seems to me. And we would like to hear from you. And when I use the word we, I mean everybody who's joining us today, and those that will pick up this program later on archive. I was asked to make a mention of the fact that yesterday's program is not posted for archive access quite as yet. I was told that there's a little bit of editing problems that they are going into taking on, but that the program will be up very soon for those that will want to catch it later on. And again, many of the emails and many of the, some of the calls we get relate to programs that happened 3 and 4 and 5 days ago, because that's when people listening to the program are able to hear it. And that's, I think one of the realities of today's technological world, and I think it's tremendous that that this stuff is there, and whenever people want it or need it or feel the need to go back and review it, it's there for them. So we invite you to give us a call and to share your thoughts and your ideas and suggestions and questions and comments with all of our listeners. Our phone number is area code 304-658-3333. That's 304-658-3333. And if you'd like to call me, email me directly about today's program or about previous programs or indeed future programs, please feel free to do that. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906, all one word, no punctuation, @gmail.com. Just a couple of comments before we get into today's program. These are just observations. In fact, what I would like to do, I'd like to take a few moments at the beginning of our program to share something with you that I've been spending an awful lot of time on, and I wanted to share it with you because basically I solicit your input. I solicit your reaction and your suggestions, your ideas, or whatever, because very honestly, I have tremendous faith in you, in the people who listen to this program and the people who listen to the Head On Radio Network in general. I think it's a special kind of person. It's a thinking person, it's an engaged person, it's a caring person. And that's the kind of person I can relate best to, and that's the kind of person I want to hear from. So I have a project that I'm working on, and I want to share some of the things that I've been doing and some of the details of it, and it's kind of related to what we're doing here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, because it is related directly to this, and I'll share it with you in a second. But something relatively minor and personal happened today. I accompanied my wife to the local mall here because she needed to buy a riding mower, a lawn-mower, and we went to our local Sears outlet here in southern West Virginia. And my wife has a 3-acre place. It was the family homestead. Literally, it's the place where she grew up, where her mom and dad raised her, and all of that. And she now has it. It's about 40 minutes away from where we live, from where I'm broadcasting right now, which is in Beckley, West Virginia. And it's very rural, and she spends a lot of time there because it takes a lot of time to keep up. It's in the mountains. It's very isolated. It's very rural, and she has about 2.5 to 3 acres that she keeps cut. So for her, riding a lawnmower is pretty significant. And her lawnmower died yesterday, and I wasn't sure. I knew when we did our program yesterday that her lawnmower had died. I didn't think it was worth talking about or holding a minute of silence for or anything else. But something happened that has been bothering me, and I just wanted to share. It doesn't relate. It relates a little bit to what we're talking about here because it deals with corporate ethics. The repair person that came out to look at my wife's old lawnmower, and he's the one that basically did the autopsy on it and basically told her that it was indeed dead. Very, very nice man. He's been out. He told her that this was the 3rd time over the last 5 or 6 years that he's been out and to repair her mower, and he was sorry to say that this time it was beyond repair. But she made a comment about buying a new mower and how expensive they are, and they indeed are. I mean, you're talking, $1,500, $1,600 in most cases. And he made a point that because her place is so rural, is so far out, so to speak, she needed to be very, very careful and make sure that whatever mower she bought, it was one that the service contract would apply to. And she naturally made the comment that to the repair person that I would have made, and said, well, that's one of the reasons I'm buying it from Sears, because one of the things that Sears has been known for years is that Sears basically services what it sells. I mean, people know that the idea of craftsmen and it's well-made stuff, and Sears has always through the years been very, very good at servicing with service contracts and various other things. And the repairman made the point and said, you need to be very careful what you buy, because even though Sears sells it, and even though it says craftsman on it, the fact of the matter is there's an awful lot of equipment that we cannot work on. And you need to make sure that what you buy is a tractor that we can work on. And then he gave her some information and told her what to look for. And there was a serial number that he mentioned with her, and he said this particular make sure that the serial number on the mower that you buy starts with the following numbers, et cetera, et cetera. I can't remember what they were, but the point was, he said, before you buy a mower, make sure that the serial number corresponds with the number that I'm giving you, because if it doesn't, we won't work on it. And she called me and told me about it. We were both kind of surprised at this. But anyway, she got the information. We went to the local Sears store today, and she found the mower she wanted, and she bought it. And the salesperson that was with her, and the first thing she said is, I have some numbers here I need to check before I close the deal and buy this particular mower. I have to make sure about the serial number and stuff. And she looked at it, and she shared with the salesperson what the repairman had told her. And he kind of looked at her wide-eyed and said, "You're kidding me." And she said, "No, I'm not. I mean, this is what he told me, that there was an awful lot of equipment that even though Sears sold it, even though it was a Sears product, we won't work on it because it's not made here. Not much of it is imported from China, probably." And he said, well, that he didn't know anything about it. And, well, now he does. And so after she bought the mower, we went to lunch, and I was quite disturbed about this. And I said, that salesman is going to, let's just imagine that you just went in to buy this mower, that you didn't have the serviceman out yesterday, and you didn't know about this serial number and all the rest of it. You would walk in there, and you would say, before I buy this mower, I just want to make sure. Now, Sears will come out and fix it if it breaks. And he's going to say, yes, indeed, we service what we sell. And he's going to be very sincere and is telling the truth because that's what he knows. But the fact of the matter is, it's not true. And so her conclusion was, well, by the time the mower breaks down, it'll be 2 years, and chances are he'll be gone. And if I go back to the store and say, John, who sold me this mower, told me that Sears would service it, and they would say, John's no longer here, and blah, 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 and we're not obligated to stay behind everything that our salespeople might say to a customer. That really bothered me. Because if you didn't have this kind of information, you'd walk in there and buy one off the floor without knowing, because they all look the same. And it really bothered me. Because we've been dealing here with corporate ethics. We're talking about corporations and the rights of, the rights of corporate personhood under the 14th Amendment, and the rights of free speech for corporations in the Citizens United case under the First Amendment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of this presumes a level of corporate ethics. We're going to get into this in quite a bit more depth here in today's program. But it seemed to me that there's something disingenuous about hiring somebody to sell a product and not giving that salesperson all the information he needs to deal honestly with his clients, with his customers. If this guy, this salesman, told a customer that the company would indeed service this particular item, he wouldn't be lying, because that's what he believed. That's what anybody would believe. But the fact of the matter, it's not true. And so the question is, does the corporation have an obligation to fix this? Either by servicing everything they sell, or not selling what they can't service or won't service. If there's going to be honest communication between seller and buyer, between company and client, then it seems to me that an awful lot of change has to be made. And I think that's one of the things that's bothering people today about this idea of corporate. John's call yesterday made the point that there might be a medium between the extreme left and the extreme right, if you will. There's probably something in the middle that's much more accurate and much more workable and much more meaningful. But as John pointed out, the question is, when the hammer comes down, more often than not, it comes down on one side all the time. And so basically, the buyer, this old expression, this expression about buyer beware, is really unfair, because there are certain things that the buyer has no way of knowing he needs to beware of. And it seems to me, until we begin to get an honest exchange, an honest back and forth between buyer and seller, that there's a real issue here. And so the question is, how are people supposed to develop faith in the fact that they are being treated honestly and fairly, when we find example after example after example of situations when that is not true? And so I think there's a faith issue here. And I think it goes back, I've heard people say all the time, whatever happened to corporate ethics? And if you look at business schools and graduate business schools, MBA programs, many of them have a course in corporate ethics as part of the curriculum. I would suggest to you that the realities of corporate ethics go way beyond the creation of a course. We're talking about the way people treat people. And until we are able to get a handle on improving the way people treat people, then we don't have a chance. And I just believe that this is very, very, very significant. We are being told, the general public, that in spite of the implications of Citizens United, which is the Supreme Court case that gave corporations the right to contribute unlimited amounts of money into campaigns, into political campaigns, under the free speech provisions of the First Amendment, and the fact that corporations are persons under the 14th Amendment, we are being assured that this is not going to mean that corporations are going to buy elections and buy candidates and own elected officials or any of this stuff. All I can think of is the assurances, if you read the Federalist Papers, that James Madison and John Jay and Alexander Hamilton made in the Federalist Papers. The one theme that goes through all 85 Federalist Papers, I would suggest to you, is almost a theme of reassurance. It's going to be all right. The potential power is there, but it'll never be used. Don't worry about it. A government of the people, by the people, and for the people is not going to set about doing wrong by the people or abusing the people. And so, in a sense, the whole theme of the Federalist Papers is kind of an approach, almost a tone of reassurance. The potential is there, but don't listen to these guys that are raising all these red flags and predicting disaster around every corner. The fact of the matter is, this is a popular government. It is a republic. Its principal purpose is to essentially maximize people's freedom and opportunity to make a success out of their lives, each and every individual in it, irrespective of color, race, religion, or anything else. That's what the system is about. And please rest assured that while all of this other potential for abuse is there, it's never going to come up that it'll be used. And I think people's over the years have been inclined to believe that. That's why so many people are upset by this situation with the drones. And other things, because, you know, now we find that the government is targeting American citizens without trial, without an attorney, without trial by jury, without being proven guilty or anything. They're just wiping them out. I mean, we can talk about, you know, whether the particular people involved here deserve it and all that. I'm sure, I'm very comfortable that in the few cases that I know about, they did. But that's not the point. The point is, where do you draw the line? How do you draw lines? How do you control this? So anyway, this little situation of buying a lawnmower raised a serious issue today, and it reminded me of something else. And I'm throwing names out here, and I really shouldn't do that because I don't mean to besmirch a company, a particular company, or anything else. I don't mean to do that. I'm just kind of sharing a story with you in order to make a point. But, you know, when I was in college, I used to work in New England. I used to work for a bakery. And one of the things that I was a little bit surprised by was the fact that the particular bakery I worked in used to make certain products, but they would make they would make the same product under 5 or 6 different labels. And of course, I was a teen, in my teens. And I walk in and walk into a grocery store and I see 5 or 6 different brands of the same item there. And I'm going to brand name shop, or I'm going to shop for a particular item, or I'm going to read the ingredients, or whatever it is I'm going to do. It kind of bothered me that inside the package, every one of these different packages was the same product because we made it. The label was different, and the implication is it has different ingredients, and the pricing might be different and all the rest of it. But on the other hand, if it's priced more under one label than it is under the other, then that's because the product that costs more probably is worth more. And yet I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, it's exactly the same item in different packages. And for a long time that bothered me. And then I began to see the way, for example, here in southern West Virginia, all of our gasoline is trucked in. And so the big gas haulers, gasoline haulers, come up the turnpike and pull off, and they go to one gas station after another. It doesn't matter what the sign over the station is, whether it's Shell or Exxon or BP or Gomart or whatever it happens to be. The same truck stops and leaves gasoline at every one of these places and then moves on. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Now, I always believed that it mattered whether you bought Exxon or Shell, or, whatever the product was, whatever the name was. But I've watched the trucks deposit a certain number of gallons at one station, then go right across the highway and drop and deposit gasoline in a competitor station across the road. Same stuff. One time I asked a question about that, and the owner of the gas station told me, well, the issue is not the gas. It's in the pump. That we have certain things in our pump, certain filters, and something happens when the gasoline comes out of the ground before it goes into your car when it goes through our pump, as opposed to that guy's pump across the street. And I had my doubts about that. And then I had this situation today. And so it seems to me that we're dealing with a whole issue of corporate ethics here. And if we are going to have faith that corporations are not going to abuse the whole idea of corporate personhood. Now, most of the people that are talking about this and writing about it are doing so because they don't trust it and they expect corporate abuse. But we are being assured that corporations are merely getting their dues, so to speak. They are finally getting rights that they have a right to because historically, under the interpretations of the Constitution through the years, corporations from the very beginning were persons. John Marshall said so, Justice Taney said so, Chief Justice Waite said so, Justice Field said so, right up into the modern period with the Warren Court, the Burger Court, and the Rehnquist Court, and now the Roberts Court. And so there's an element of faith that's associated here. And I guess it's an important issue, and it's one that we all need to think about, and we all need to basically think about very, very carefully. I mentioned at the start of the program, which actually was a while ago, it took me a little while to tell that story about the lawnmower. It's actually not my lawnmower, it's my wife's. I mentioned a project, and I wanted to share this with you because everything I do over the last 2 months since we've started the virtual center here on the Head On Radio Network, everything I do with an eye towards the program and towards you who are kind enough to tune in and participate in our program, hopefully often, but even if you're just stopping by and you search through the internet, I welcome you, and we would love to hear from you. But I have a project in mind, and it's related pretty much to what we're doing, and that's kind of what I know. And I wanted to share it with you because over the last couple of weeks I've been working quite diligently on this. And yesterday I had a meeting at noon with our local Rotary Club here in southern West Virginia. And I think I've mentioned before that come July 1, I will be honored to be chosen as president of that club. And so for the next year, I'll be president of our Beckley Rotary Club here in Southern West Virginia. And one of the things that Rotary does, as many of you know, it's a very, very service-oriented organization. In fact, its motto is service above self. I take that very seriously. And one of the things I want to do during my year as president is make it a point to the membership at large of how important it is to be a Rotarian and to be attending Rotary clubs, and how important Rotary is throughout the world, and to make people aware of what the elimination of polio in the world means, and the fact that the Rotary Club did this. This is incredible. And it's bringing fresh water and medical care and improved education and health care and everything else to people in the underdeveloped world, and on and on and on. I won't go into Rotary. That's not my point. My point is that we do projects here locally, as Rotary clubs everywhere do, and we try to raise money, and then the Rotary Club uses that money for worthy projects. And so one of the things we do here, we've done it for the last several years, is hold a golf tournament. And the Rotary Club usually does pretty well in its golf tournament. We raise a lot of money and through the golf tournament, and that gives us working opportunity throughout the rest of the year to excuse me, to provide support to particular service needs in our community. And so as we prepare for our golf tournament coming up later this summer, one of the things that those who are working on the golf committee have asked for is a project. You know, could the Rotary Board come up with an idea or a project that they could use to advertise or to solicit participation in the golf tournament? People are much more likely to come forward with foursomes and teams and participate in the golf tournament if they know where the profits, where the money raised is going to go. So over the last couple of months, the board has been charged with finding a project. And I have one. And I went before the board yesterday and presented my project. And the board endorsed it overwhelmingly. In fact, they basically said this is something Rotary has to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I was very happy about that. And so I wanted to share the project with you because it relates directly to what we're doing here at the Virtual Center for the study of the Constitution. Basically, what I'm proposing, what I propose to the Rotary Club, is the designing of a course, a college course. It'll be worth 3 credits. It'll be a college level course, which hopefully will transfer wherever high school students might want to go to college, locally or outside the area. It will be a course based on what we're talking. It'll be based on America's founding, on its founding documents, and what this nation is all about. It'll be on the nature of a republic. It'll be on, it'll look at the issue of citizenship, what citizenship in a republic really means, what citizens are expected to do, what rights our citizens have in this republic, and what responsibilities our citizens have in this republic. What the relationship is between the central government and the state governments, between the state governments and municipal governments, between government and citizens, between individual rights and responsibilities, between government's right to regulate and people's right to be free, to exercise individual liberty. And of course, one of the major areas which we've been into is the idea of corporate freedom, the idea of the right of free enterprise to operate And again, looking at what its rights are, but also what its responsibilities are. Looking at things like the incredible unequal distribution of wealth and income in the country and what the potential negative outcomes of this might be if something isn't done to fix it, and on and on and on. That's really what the course is about. I wanted to share this with you. I've entitled the course Foundations of the American Republic, 1750 to 1815. That would take us from 10 to 15 years prior to the Declaration of Independence to the end of the War of 1812. It's not going to get in directly into the Civil War, into Andrew Jackson, or any of that stuff in the 19th century, but it will cover the so-called founding period. What I was able to, what I received yesterday from the Rotary Club was a commitment that the Rotary Club has committed to subsidize the tuition of every student in our community who takes this class. We have 5 high schools in our county. And what I'm proposing is that we make this course available in every one of the schools to juniors and seniors. Not necessarily the college-bound academic superstars who are going to the Ivy League schools, and we have those. But this is going to be available not only to them, but also to those who aren't sure whether they want to or even can go to college. It's going to be a skills-based course because it's going to focus principally on primary documents. There will be no textbook. Students will read and discuss in seminar fashion and understand and write about and get on the internet and do research on primary documents, on the Declaration, on the Bill of Rights, on the Constitution, on Madison's Federalist Number 10 and Federalist 51, on some of the key Federalist papers, on some of the major anti-Federalist papers criticizing the Constitution. These students will confront Charles Beard and his economic interpretation of the Constitution. They will understand what economic development and free enterprise capitalism it means as it moves from an agrarian 18th century into a much more industrial 19th century and 20th century. And it will not be a semester-long course, 15 weeks. It'll be a course that will run the entire academic year, from September to the end of May, to June. It'll be skills-based. And what I mean by that is students will read. They will read primary documents. They will write up research. They will write interpretive papers. They will write argumentative papers. And they will get 3 credits of tuition, of 3 credits, college credits, for taking this course. It'll be a history course, but it'll also be a skills-based course. It will be focused on teaching students how to write, how to make an argument, how to use evidence, how to distinguish between the important and the less important, how to compile evidence, how to make a case, how to structure an essay, how to write up an original research, how to do citations, how to quote, what plagiarism is. My sense is that at the end of this course, after taking this course, students will not only know whether they want to go to college or not, but they'll also begin to have some idea of whether in fact they can do it or not. It is also my belief, based on a lot of years of experience, that students who go through this course are probably going to be better prepared than students who come from other places who do not have a course like this. And what the Rotary Club here has agreed to do, which I think is incredible, is subsidize 50% of the tuition for every student who chooses to take the course. I don't plan to limit enrollment. If we end up with 75 students, so be it. One of the concerns that the people on the Rotary Board had, which to tell you the truth, I found very encouraging, was what about the student who can't even afford 50% of the tuition? What about the student who comes from a broken home or a single-parent home or lives with their grandparents and there's no way in the world that they could come up with even half of the tuition? Will they be excluded? What the Rotary Club wanted, and what I agreed to do, but more than willingly, was that we would make provision where the Rotary Club would pay the full tuition for those students who demonstrated a real need for it, who absolutely needed it. And what we would request is that these students, if you will, work out or repay the Rotary Club for the tuition by participating actively in service projects in the community, Rotary projects. Because one of the things we're talking about doing is locating a Rotary Interact Club in each of the high schools. And so students will become almost junior Rotarians, if you will. They will be working under a teacher who will be a coordinator or an organizer in their school. And they will be involved in service, in community projects, service projects, volunteer projects. And so what we're looking for is students who participate actively in these projects can, in a sense, repay the community for the tuition that the community might be putting up to support their tuition for the schools. And I'm very excited about it. I don't know, I mean, what do we do if we get 200 students, for example? I don't know how I'm possibly going to do all that reading. But basically what we're anticipating is that I will be working with a teacher in each of the high schools, and that the teachers will be kind of the on-site, and I'll be mentoring, and we'll be a team. And we'll organize the documents, and the teachers will lead the discussions, and they will basically make the assignments and look at the papers and various other things. And what we will end up with is an opportunity to do something that I believe might be very, very exciting and very, very rewarding for our community, which is what Rotary is about. And I'm excited about it. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the local school board and floated the idea there about a month ago, and got a tremendous response there. And one of the things that the person at the school board office that I was talking with suggested is that I go to our local Chamber of Commerce and see if they will buy in, and they will partner with the Rotary Club in sponsoring this program. And so I did that. I went to the Chamber of Commerce monthly meeting, and proposed it, and basically got a vote of confidence. And so the local Chamber of Commerce has agreed to partner and support this program as well, this project as well. So yesterday, when I finally got the positive vote of the Rotary Board, and that mainly involved money, and that's what I was unable, I could not go out and commit to the spending of this kind of money, because conceivably it could be $100, $110, $120 per student, and we don't know how many there could be. So 20 students at $100, 20 students would be $2,000. And so realistically, this could be a substantial amount of money. And I had to wait until the board was willing to do it and was comfortable embracing the project. And I got that vote of confidence yesterday, and I'm thrilled about it. It'll probably be the last regular college course that I'll ever teach. But I'm looking forward to it, and I wanted to share it with you because I really do solicit your input and your reaction and your suggestions and things that I might do. People who are tuned in to today's program are all over the country, potentially all over the world. And you know the kinds of things that are happening in your regions, and there may be things going on that would fit very well into this that I hadn't thought about incorporating. It's going to involve a lot of technology. It's going to involve a lot of internet work. It's going to involve a lot of Skyping and a lot of back and forth between myself and the teachers. because these schools are spread all over a very large county, rural county in southern West Virginia. So there's no way physically that I would be able to go from school to school to school. I will obviously make it a point to visit each one through the year, but the point is there's no way to do that kind of travel. I would spend most of my time on the road, and that would be counterproductive. So what I'm going to be doing is working closely with these teachers, and we're going to be not only teaching a course for credit, but we're going to be teaching skills. And not only are we going to do that, but we're going to be introducing the whole idea of community service in schools which may not have a whole lot of it. And we're going to basically encourage people to become familiar with what Rotarians are and what Rotarians do, and why being a Rotarian is so important in today's world. I mean, and it's tied very, very closely to the whole idea of what being a citizen in this republic in today's world is all about. And so I'm very excited about it. I know it's going to be a challenge. I know there's going to be a lot of roadblocks and things come up that I hadn't thought about. And if you can come up with a few of those and kind of prepare me ahead of time and give me a heads up, I'd sure appreciate it. So again, you don't have to, if you want to call in, I would love to hear from you. The number is 304-658-3333. If you want to email me at waobrien906@gmail.com, I would love to hear from you, especially if you have suggestions or comments or things to watch out for or whatever. I've never done anything like this. I've been teaching college for better than 40 years. So just interacting with high school juniors and seniors is going to be a challenge for me, because I read the papers and I know some of the bad stuff that goes on in our schools, and so I'm a little bit intimidated by it, but at the same time I'm very excited about it as well. As I go undertake retirement, I'm thinking to myself, I really believe that over the years I've developed the things that I really need to share with people, and this might be a way to do it. And that's what I'm doing. My wife is incredibly supportive. Obviously, she's going to be cutting a lot of grass while I'm doing this, and so anyway, I'm excited about it. She's excited because I'm excited. And here I am retiring, and I'm as excited about this project as I was when I first went into teaching 48 years ago. So with that, again, I want to thank you for your tolerance and your patience and giving me the opportunity to share that with you. I could go into a lot of details, but I won't at this point about the class. As I mentioned, because it's a skills-based class, it's going to run 2 semesters rather than just 1, and that's going to basically mean that that students are going to have a little bit of flexibility. They're going to remember this class. Hopefully, that's my intent. One of the things that I insisted upon, and the Rotary kind of supported me on this, I didn't want the Rotary to pay the full tuition for students. I didn't want students to see this as an opportunity to have their tuition paid. I didn't want to do that because, very honestly, one of the things that I'm convinced of is that it's very important that they themselves have some skin in this game. I've learned with grants and various other things that if you pay for the whole thing, then students tend not to appreciate. I mean, students come in to me as an instructor who are on financial aid and scholarship and everything else. Somebody else is paying their tuition, and they are not uncomfortable at all with dropping classes randomly if they're too hard. They'll come in and students will drop a class because they feel that it's too hard, or they feel that it's too much work, or they feel that they can't be guaranteed to get an A and it might hurt their grade point average. And so for all of these reasons that have nothing to do with learning, students find it easier to drop classes if they're not paying for it. And so I feel that in a course like this, while it's very important that Rotary is sponsoring it and endorsing it and will obviously be involved in the advertising of it, I think parents need to know that the Rotary Club is doing this. I think the newspaper needs to know that the business community here in southern West Virginia is willing to do this. But I think it's important the students themselves have a little bit of their own sweat equity, if you will, invested in this enterprise. They'll be a little bit more inclined to stay with it and to struggle if it starts to get hard. They're a little bit less likely to drop out because they won't have there will be nothing lost for them or their parents. But again, we live in a poor region, and there are people that will not be able to afford even the 50%. And I so appreciated those Rotarians who were concerned about the people that couldn't even afford the 50%. That made me feel pretty good, very honestly. And so that's what we've got looking at us coming here in the fall. And one of the things, one of the reasons I wanted to share it with you is because I believe in the fall that we'll be able to connect a lot of these students to our program. As we cover specific documents and specific issues here related to the founders and related to the Constitution, it seems to me that it will be very, very appropriate to alert students to our program and to get students to begin to participate and listen to the calls and the discussions that happen here at the virtual center. I believe that they'll be able to bring a lot to these discussions. Hopefully they'll be able to take a lot away from them as well. And so I see this virtual center in our few hours in the afternoon together as an opportunity to integrate this somewhat with the class in the sense that we will theoretically expand our listenership some, but more important, we'll educate our local students in this region some by acquainting them with our program, with the virtual center, and with the kinds of people that listen to the Head On Radio Network. So I think it's a win-win in a lot of different ways. It has the potential to be that, and I'm very, very excited about it. We have reached the top of the hour. It's 58 minutes after the hour. Why don't we take our 4 or 5 minute break and stretch, and then we'll get into today's program. I want to get into a document that I mentioned yesterday, which was authored by Justice Lewis Powell, who was appointed to the Supreme Court, nominated by President Nixon in August of 1971, and basically sailed through the United States Senate in his nomination because Lewis Powell was seen as a moderate, a Republican, but a moderate. And he basically received the overwhelming endorsement of the members of the United States Senate for appointment to the Supreme Court in 1971. And he authored this document in the year 1971, and I wanted to kind of conclude our discussions this week on the whole idea of corporate personhood with this particular document. But let's take a 4 or 5 minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll launch into Lewis Powell. Please stay with us. Welcome back. If you have been with us, we thank you for staying with us for our second hour on this Wednesday afternoon. And if you are just joining us, we welcome you to the Head On Radio Network. We welcome you to the Virtual Center on the Study of the Constitution. Again, our phone number, area code 304-658-3333. My email address, my personal email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906@gmail.com. In our first hour, if you're just joining us, basically I was sharing a project that I'll be taking on beginning in the fall through the next school year, offering a skills-based American history course on the founding to high school juniors and seniors in our region here in southern West Virginia. And it's related potentially related to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and that's one reason that I wanted to share with everybody what it was about. But to be honest with you, and I said this at the beginning of that when I first approached that issue last hour, and I want to reiterate it again. My principal reason for sharing this with you is because I really look forward to your input and your suggestions and your ideas and your heads-ups and all the rest of it with a project like this. I have tremendous faith in the people who listen to the Head On Radio Network and who are tuned into the Virtual Center. And I think you are very, very special people. And therefore, I welcome your input and your suggestions and your ideas or whatever. We've been talking about issues related to corporatism and corporate personhood, corporate ethics, the whole nature of the Constitution, the extent to which the Constitution is principally about people, about human beings, or whether the Constitution perhaps is more about economic systems and the kind of economic system, the kind of economic environment in which some of the founders believed that people would do best individually. And again, I think that this is an important issue, and I think a lot of it is based on trust, and I think the interaction, the whole idea of a popular government and the relationship between government, between employer and employee, between citizen and government, between private institutions and organizations and corporations who are created for a particular part to achieve a particular purpose or to help in the pursuit of the public interest in our society. I think all of this suggests a kind of interaction and engagement that I think is very, very important. And I basically look forward to this particular project. I look forward to the ideas and the suggestions that those of you listening might be able to share with me. And so that's the reason I presented it. But what I wanted to do this hour is get back into the issue yesterday, and let me just kind of set it up by mentioning just where we were at the conclusion of yesterday's program. One of the things that I think is very important, we were talking specifically about Citizens United case and the whole idea of corporate contributions to political campaigns being defined as speech under the First Amendment. And that particular determination came out of a case decided by the Supreme Court in 1976 called First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti. And that particular decision was written by Lewis Powell. And so that's kind of where I want to focus most of our attention today. But what I was doing yesterday, what I was mentioning yesterday, and I think it's a background to this because it suggests how important the particular justice who writes the decision in a particular case might be. The Citizens United decision, which prompts a lot of our concerns about corporate free speech, even though it was heard in 2010 by the Roberts Court, the decision was not written by Chief Justice Roberts. It was written by Justice Kennedy. And I think that's very significant because Justice Kennedy is kind of the swing vote between moderates, between liberals and conservatives on the court. And the fact that he votes frequently with the liberal wing of the Supreme Court, if you will, the fact that he wrote this decision and voted in this case with the conservative majority, with the Alitos and the Scalias and the Clarence Thomases and John Roberts, etc., it's very significant that he wrote this decision because the credibility of the decision, in part at least, is assured somewhat by the fact that the conservative Chief Justice was not the one who wrote up the decision, but in a sense the moderate, if you will, on the court, Justice Kennedy, wrote the decision. So basically, it almost says to the general public, even though you might be afraid of this decision, don't be, because, you know, it's a kind of it basically creates a tone of self-assurance, of reassurance to those people that might be most concerned about the particular decision. So who writes the decision, I think, is important, and in this case, the fact that the Citizens United decision was written by Kennedy, I think is significant. Maybe not as significant as I'm making it, but I think it matters. There's absolutely no question that the Bellotti decision being written by Justice Powell matters. And we talked about that decision. I'm not going to go back into the Bellotti decision. I'd rather spend our time, to the rest of our program today, talking about Lewis Powell. But, you know, again, just a reminder that one of the things that it is significant about the Bellotti decision, besides the fact that it ruled in favor of corporations contributing money to political campaigns and having those contributions defined by the court as speech under the First Amendment. I think that's very important. That's really what the decision is about. The other thing that I think is important about Bellotti is that one of the two dissenters in that decision was William Rehnquist, who is to become Chief Justice later on, and is well known as a conservative. The Rehnquist court is considered to be very conservative on the issue of citizen rights. And the fact that Rehnquist dissented in the Bellotti decision, I think, is very significant, because his whole career would seem to suggest that he would endorse the benefits to corporations coming out of this decision. But he does not, for reasons that we talked about, and I think that's significant in itself. But Lewis Powell writes the decision. Lewis Powell, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program today, was appointed by President Nixon. He was nominated in August of 1971, and in the fall of 1971, he appears before the Senate, and the Senate endorses his appointment not unanimously, as I recall, but pretty overwhelmingly. Lewis Powell does not frighten a lot of people because he's a jurist. He has a corporate background. As you know, he was a tobacco man in the Virginia legislature in the years that he served there, and he was, you know, a voice for a major corporate interest in Virginia politics, which is tobacco. Philip Morris, one of the major employers, major industries in the Richmond area, for example, and that was Lewis Powell's background. He was their man, if you will, in the Virginia legislature. So he had a corporate background, and liberals in the United States Senate, Democrats, knew that. But they also trusted in Lewis Powell's moderation and the fact that he was a jurist, and he had a wonderful reputation as an attorney, as a corporate attorney. He was the head of the Richmond School Board, and he really didn't solicit any real concerns when President Nixon appointed him. The reality is that earlier in 1971, the very year that he was appointed, he drafted a memorandum, a confidential memorandum, to his friend, who is chairman of the Education Committee for the United States Chamber of Commerce. His name is Eugene Sydnor, Sydnor, Eugene Sydnor. And in 1971, Lewis Powell drafts a document, a confidential memorandum to Eugene Sydnor entitled Attack of American Free Enterprise System. And in this document, Lewis Powell lays out a strategy, makes the case for what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce needed to do in order to counter the attacks on free enterprise that were so rampant in the country in the early 70s. Now, of course, this comes out of the 60s. This is the era of Vietnam. It's the era of the civil rights movement. Robert Kennedy was assassinated in 1968. The Democratic Convention happened in 1968. So there is serious criticism from a number of different quarters on corporations, on free enterprise, on capitalism. And Lewis Powell's concern is that nobody is responding to it. And he basically puts together an extensive memorandum to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in which he lays out what is necessary for corporate America to do in order to counter what is happening in the country as far as the attacks on capitalism, on free enterprise, on entrepreneurism, and all the rest of it. And I think this document is incredibly significant, not only for what it says, but for what it produces. Because there's no question in the 1970s, and especially going into the 1980s, that out of this strategy, out of this document, is born organizations like the Heritage Foundation. William F. Buckley has already started the National Review. He has already begun a conservative counter to the liberalism of the late 60s and the early 70s. So this is a very volatile period in American history. I think that Lewis Powell's role in it is underappreciated and needs to be recognized. And that's one of the things that I would like to do today. Reason? It is Lewis Powell who writes the decision in Bilotti. It is Lewis Powell who specifically says that corporate contributions to political campaigns, even if they are limited, because remember, the Bilotti case found constitutional the Massachusetts law limiting the size of corporate contributions to political campaigns. But Lewis Powell is the one that makes the case, makes the point in his decision that whatever contributions corporations make to political campaigns must be considered speech. And that becomes the juridical foundation, the legal foundation, if you will, for Citizens United, which is going to happen 35 years later. So I think Lewis Powell's position and Lewis Powell's activities in terms of corporate America and in terms of free enterprise are very significant. I mentioned at the conclusion of yesterday's program, and I want to reiterate it again, this is just speculation on my part. But I believe that if members of the United States Senate were fully aware that Lewis Powell had drafted this memo in the same year that he was appointed to the Supreme Court, the same year that he appeared before the Senate for confirmation as a justice on the United States Supreme Court, I believe that that if his authorship of this memorandum was more broadly was known, that he probably would have encountered a lot more opposition in his nomination to the court than he received. Basically, I wanted to take some time to share some of the ingredients of this memorandum with you, because I think it is incredibly significant. Right at the very beginning, he says that his memorandum is submitted at your request. He's sending it to his friend Eugene Sidner, at your request, as a basis for the discussion on August 24th with Mr. Booth, the Executive Vice President, and others at the Chamber of Commerce. The purpose is to identify the problem and suggest possible avenues of action for further considerations. No thoughtful person, Powell said, can question that the American economic system is under broad attack. This varies in scope, intensity, and in techniques employed, and in the level of visibility. And in a footnote, Lewis Powell makes the point that this attack is that the object of attack variously is called free enterprise system, capitalism, the profit system, and then he says the American political system of democracy under the rule of law is also under attack, often by the same individuals and organizations who seek to undermine the free enterprise system. And then he goes on to talk about the nature of that attack. And I'm reading excerpts from the document. He says, "What now concerns us is quite new in the history of America. We are not dealing with sporadic or isolated attacks from a relatively few extremists or even from the minority socialist cadre in America. Rather, the assault on the enterprise system is broadly based and consistently pursued. It is gaining momentum and converts." Then he has a section entitled Sources of the Attack, in which he says the following: "The most disquieting voices joining the chorus of criticism come from perfectly respectable elements of society, from the college campus, the pulpit, the media, the intellectual and literary journals, the arts and sciences, and from politicians. In most of these groups, the movement against the system is participated in only by minorities. Yet these often are the most articulate, the most vocal, and the most prolific in their writing and speaking." In other words, we're not talking about a majority of America's students, a majority of American ministers, or a majority of the media in America. But we're talking about very articulate segments of each of these constituencies. And as such, even though they remain minorities, yet the whole issue is a principal cause for concern. He goes on, "One of the bewildering paradoxes of our time is the extent to which the free enterprise system tolerates, if not participates in, its own destruction. The campuses, from which much of the criticism emanates, are supported by tax funds generated from American business and contributions from capital funds controlled or generated by American business. The boards of trustees of our universities overwhelmingly are composed of men and women who are leaders in this system." And then he goes into a section entitled The Tone of the Attack, and he specifically mentions the very famous radical attorney William Kunstler, who has passed away since this time. But he mentions William Kunstler by name, who was welcomed on college campuses and listed in recent student polls as the American lawyer most admired. And then he quotes William Kunstler, who tells his audience that you must learn to fight in the streets, to revolt, to shoot guns. We will learn to do all the things that property owners fear, etc., etc., etc. And then Lewis Powell points out, this is a quote, since February 1970, this is August, this is mid-year, in fact, the date of this memorandum is August 23rd, 1971. So he is saying since February 1970, which is last February for him, branches of the Bank of America have been attacked 39 times, 22 times with explosive devices and 17 times with firebombs or by arsonists. And then he starts talking about specific colleges, and he's quoting Stuart Alsop, who is a Yalie, who is a graduate of Yale. And Stuart Alsop makes the point that Yale, like every other major college in America, is graduating scores of bright young men who are practitioners of what he calls the politics of despair. These young men despise the American political and economic systems. Their minds seem to be wholly closed. They live not by rational discussion, but by mindless slogans. And then Powell goes on. A visiting professor from England at Rockford College in Illinois gave a series of lectures entitled The Ideological War Against Western Society, unquote, in which he documents the extent to which members of the intellectual community are waging ideological warfare against the enterprise system and the values of Western society. In a foreword to these lectures, famed Dr. Milton Friedman of Chicago warned, "It is crystal clear that the foundations of our free society are under wide-ranging and powerful attack, not by communists or any other conspiracy, but by misguided individuals parroting one another and unwittingly serving ends they would never intentionally promote," unquote. In other words, what Lewis Powell is suggesting is the brunt of the attack is not being conducted by ideological radicals per se, but rather by unwitting liberal students who don't know any better, who really don't understand the ramifications of what they're engaged in. And then Lewis Powell mentions the popularity of Ralph Nader. And he quotes Ralph Nader in an article that appeared in Fortune magazine as follows. Fortune magazine speaks of Nader in this quote, "The passion that rules in him, and he is a passionate man, is aimed at smashing utterly the target of his hatred, which is corporate power. Nader thinks and says quite bluntly that a great many corporate executives belong in prison for defrauding the consumer with shoddy merchandise, poisoning the food supply with chemical additives, and willfully manufacturing unsafe products that will maim or kill the buyer. He emphasizes that he is not talking just about fly-by-night hucksters, but the top management of blue-chip business in America." And this is the tone of the attack that Lewis Powell is expressing to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And he says, these foregoing references illustrate the broad shotgun attack on the system. There are countless examples of rifle shots which undermine confidence and confuse the general public. Favorite targets are proposals for tax incentives through changes in depreciation rights and investment credits. These are usually described in the media as tax breaks, loopholes, or tax benefits for the benefit of business. As viewed by a columnist in the Washington Post, such tax measures would benefit only the rich, the owners of big companies, unquote. So in this section, Lewis Powell has pointed out the tone of the attack and where it's coming from and why it is so significant. Now he addresses the next piece of his memorandum, the apathy of business, the unwillingness of business to respond to these attacks. And he has a whole section on it about businesses' seeming unwillingness to fight back. And he says, in all fairness, it must be recognized that businessmen have not been trained or equipped to conduct guerrilla warfare with those who propagandize against the system, seeking insidiously and constantly to sabotage it. The traditional role of business executives has been to manage, to produce, to sell, to create jobs, to make profits, to improve the standard of living, to be community leaders, to serve on charitable and educational boards, and generally to be good citizens. They have performed these tasks very well, indeed. But they have not been trained, Powell is saying, to participate in the kind of guerrilla warfare that they are confronting in this nation today, which is 1971. And then he talks about General Motors specifically and Ralph Nader specifically as an example. Then he goes on to a section entitled The Responsibility of Business Executives. He asks, what specifically should be done? The first essential, a prerequisite to any effective action, is for businessmen to confront this problem as a primary responsibility of corporate management. If corporate management doesn't deal with this, who's going to? Powell is saying to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And then he goes on and says, a significant first step by individual corporations could well be the designation of an executive vice president, ranking with other executive vice presidents, whose responsibility is to counter on the broadest front the attack on the enterprise system. The Public Relations Department could be one of the foundations assigned to this executive, but his responsibilities should encompass some of the types of activities referred to subsequently in this memorandum. His budget and his staff should be adequate to the task. So what Powell is advocating to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a counterattack by corporate America. And then he entitles a section of his memorandum, Possible Role of the Chamber of Commerce. And he points out the realities of this kind of a campaign. Independent and uncoordinated activity by individual corporations, as important as this is, he says, will not be sufficient. Strength lies in organization, in careful long-range planning and implementation, in consistency of action over an indefinite period of years, in the scale of financing available only through joint effort, and in the political power available only through united action and national organizations. Basically, what Lewis Powell is suggesting is that the National Chamber of Commerce take on this war, take on this counterattack. The role of the National Chamber of Commerce, he says, is vital. Other national organizations, especially those of various industrial and commercial groups, should join in the effort, but no other organizations appear to be as well situated as the Chamber. It enjoys a strategic position with a fine reputation and a broad base of support. Also, and this is of immeasurable merit, there are hundreds of local chambers of commerce which can play a vital supportive role. And then he goes on and talks about the program or the strategy itself. And the first point of attack is the college campus. And this is what he says. Although origins, sources, and causes are complex and interrelated, and obviously difficult to identify without careful qualification, there is reason to believe that the campus is the single most dynamic source. The social science faculties usually include members who are unsympathetic to the enterprise system. They may range from a Herbert Marcuse, Marxist faculty member at the University of California at San Diego, and convinced socialists, to the ambivalent liberal critic who finds more to condemn than to commend. Such faculty members need not be in a majority. They are often personally attractive and magnetic. They are stimulating teachers, and their controversy attacks student following. They are prolific writers and lecturers. They author many of the textbooks, and they exert enormous influence, far out of proportion to their numbers, on their colleagues and in the academic world. In other words, the first point of attack are some of the most popular, well-published lecturers on the college campuses. The faculty who are most influential with students, the best teachers, the most popular faculty members, the ones who are most likely to attract large student followings. These are the people that we have to deal with. He goes on. Social science faculties, the political scientists, economists, sociologists, and many of the historians tend to be liberally oriented, even when leftists are not present. Then he says, this is not a criticism per se, as the need for liberal thought is essential to a balanced viewpoint. The difficulty is that balance is conspicuous by its absence on many campuses, with relatively few members being of conservative or moderate persuasion, and even the relatively few often being less articulate and aggressive than their crusading colleagues. What he's basically attacking here is the liberalism of the American campus in the early 1970s. And what he's pointing out is that there are few conservative faculty members on these campuses. And even where there are some, they tend to be less articulate and less aggressive than the liberal crusaders. And so ultimately what the Chamber of Commerce is being asked to take on here is higher education throughout the United States, and especially the perceived lack of balance and lack of presence of a conservative point of view on America's campuses. What he points out is that many of the students, many of the brightest students who are going into these fields and are being taught by these faculty members are, Lewis Powell says, bright young men, this is a quote, bright young men from campuses across the country who seek opportunities to change a system which they have been taught to distrust. In many instances, these intellectuals end up in regulatory agencies or government departments with large authority over the business system they do not believe in. Many of these students, the brightest students, are being taught by those who criticize the system, who criticize corporate America, who criticize free enterprise. And when these students graduate, they get jobs in government. And they become the regulators of the very corporations that they have no respect for at all. And this, Lewis Powell is saying to the Chamber of Commerce, is what our challenge is about. Few things, he says, are more sanctified in American life than academic freedom. It would be fatal to attack this system as a principle. We can't proceed by attacking academic freedom. Academic freedom is sanctified. It is the thing more than anything else that once you step in the classroom, then there is no censorship. The free exchange of ideas is supposed to happen. It would be fatal, he says, to us to attack the principle of academic freedom. But then he says, but if academic freedom is to retain the qualities of openness, fairness, and balance, which are essential to its intellectual significance, there is a great opportunity for constructive action. While academic freedom is allowing the problem to happen on our campuses, it also gives us the opportunity to counter it. His next paragraph, what can be done about the campus? The ultimate responsibility for intellectual integrity on the campus must remain on the administrations and faculty of our colleges and universities. But organizations such as the Chamber of Commerce can assist and activate constructive change in many ways, including the following. And then he lays out an agenda, a strategic agenda of what he wants the Chamber to do in taking on this issue. First, he wants the Chamber to consider establishing a staff of highly qualified scholars in the social sciences who do believe in the free enterprise system. It should include several of national reputation whose authorship would be widely respected, even when disagreed with. He wants the Chamber to sponsor and subsidize conservative academics who can challenge the liberals on the campuses of America. Secondly, he wants the Chamber to sponsor a staff of speakers of the highest competency. These might include scholars, and certainly those who speak for the Chamber would have to articulate the product of the scholars. In other words, we need to come up with a group of people that can basically present the other side. We need a speakers bureau. In addition to full-time staff personnel, the Chamber should have a speakers bureau where prominent, articulate speakers are loaned out to specific colleges and specific departments. The next item, evaluation of textbooks. This staff of scholars, or preferably a panel of independent scholars, should evaluate social science textbooks, especially in economics, political science, and sociology. This should be a continuing program. We will censor textbooks to make sure that they say the right things and don't say the wrong things. The objective of such an evaluation, he said, should be oriented toward restoring the balance essential to genuine academic freedom. This would include assurance of fair and factual treatment of our system of government and our free enterprise system, its accomplishments, its basic relationship to individual rights and freedoms, and comparisons with the system of socialism, fascism, and communism. Most of the existing textbooks have some sort of comparisons, but many are superficial, biased, and unfair. The premise here is that what students are getting is biased, unfair, and superficial. The alternative is an aggressive attack from the other direction. We've seen the civil rights movement do this by insisting on rewriting many of our textbooks. We've seen labor unions do it. If the authors, publishers, and users of textbooks, this is a quote, know that they will be subjected honestly, fairly, and thoroughly to review and critique by eminent scholars who believe in the American system, a return to a more rational balance can be expected. And then he said what the chamber needs to insist on is equal time on campus. The chamber should insist on equal time on the college speaking circuit. We need representation of American business on the campuses as well as spokesmen for communism, he says. We must insist on equal time. And then he says something that's very important. The objective must always be to inform and enlighten and not merely to propagandize. It seems to me, this is me talking, not Lewis Powell, it seems to me that the objective here is to meet propaganda with propaganda from the other side. To, in other words, bombard students from both sides. The concern is they're only getting it from one side now. The alternative, notice, the alternative is not to educate. Notice that the alternative, it is, all of this is based on the fact that students do not think. They become whatever the propaganda aimed at them proposes or asks them to become. They do not leave the campus educated, they leave the campus propagandized. And what we have to do, what the chamber has to do, is make sure that we have the opportunity to propagandize students as much as the opponents of the enterprise system have that opportunity. We must insist, he has a section here entitled The Balancing of Faculties. We must insist that college faculties hire conservatives. We must demand equal treatment. But he said there are obvious pitfalls to this. We must avoid improper pressure. That would be counterproductive, he said. Then he says we must depend on graduate schools of business to become active in this discussion. Should not the chamber request specific courses in graduate business schools dealing with the entire scope of the problem addressed by this memorandum? This is now essential training for our executives of the future, unquote. Lewis Powell is suggesting that graduate business faculty must become soldiers in this war. Then he goes down to secondary education, and he talks about what the National Chamber needs to do in the education of high school students. Then he moves on in a paragraph entitled, What Can Be Done About the Public? We must begin an educational campaign to communicate actively, effectively, and aggressively with the public. He talks about television. National television networks need to be monitored. We need to monitor daily news analysis, which so often includes, this is a quote, the most insidious type of criticism of the enterprise system. Whether this criticism results from hostility or economic ignorance, the result is the gradual erosion of confidence in business and free enterprise. We must counter this. We must go into radio. We must move into talk radio. We must begin to actively and visibly participate in scholarly journals. It is especially important for the Chamber's faculty of scholars to publish. These conservative supporters of enterprise must publish. Business must subsidize them, must support them, must give them fellowships and scholarships and grants. Incentives must be devised to induce more publishing by independent scholars who believe in the system. I want to say that again. I want to read that again because this is a quote from the memorandum. Incentives might be devised to induce more publishing by independent scholars who do believe in the system. The question I ask is, if the scholarship is done by a person who believes in the system, is that scholar any longer independent? Or is he biased to the right? Powell then talks about books, paperbacks, and pamphlets. Newsstands at airports, drugstores, and elsewhere are filled with paperbacks and pamphlets advocating everything from revolution to erotic free love, he says. One finds almost no attractive, well-written paperbacks or pamphlets on our side. Our side, in quotes. Our side. Paid advertisements. Business pays hundreds of millions of dollars to the media for advertising. Most of it supports specific products. Much of it supports institutional image making, and some fraction of it does support the system. But the latter has been more or less tangential and really part of a sustained major effort to inform and enlighten the American people, this is me adding, on the benefits of the free enterprise system. If American business devoted 10% of its total annual advertising budgets to this overall purposes, then he talks about the neglected political arena. We have got to basically get support for the system into the political arena. Politics, he says, is still Marxist doctrine that capitalist countries are controlled by big business. This doctrine, consistently a part of leftist propaganda all over the world, has a wide public following among Americans. Yet, as every business executive knows, few elements of American society today have as little influence on government as the American businessman, the corporation, or even the millions of corporate shareholders and stockholders. He basically says that the American business executive today is truly the forgotten man. And he talks about the impotency of business and how we must reverse this. One should not postpone more direct political action while awaiting the gradual change in public opinion to be effected through education and information. This is the lesson that political power is necessary, that such power must be assiduously cultivated, and that when necessary it must be used aggressively and with determination. And then he has a section on the neglected opportunity in the courts. And he talks about the degree to which liberals are dictating the interpretation of the law from our courts. And he cites specifically the American Civil Liberties Union as a classic example of that. And then he talks about, with respect to scholars and speakers, the chamber would need a highly competent staff of lawyers. And what we have to do is begin to develop the neglected stockholder power. He says there are 20 million Americans who own stock in companies. We have to mobilize them. We have to make them part of our pro-enterprise army. They must be mobilized to support an educational program and a political action program. And all of it must include a much more aggressive attitude on the part of business and supporters. And he points to the Wall Street Journal as examples of which must be made available more and more again. There needs to be no more hesitation to attack the Naders and the Marcuses and others who openly seek destruction of our system. He is advocating what becomes Fox News. And the discussions on the news and the Hannitys and the programs that attack, even when they bring academics on, they attack them. They much more attack the whole idea of civility of discussion. The kind of intellectual discussion that is supposed to happen on college campuses does not happen in this kind of a campaign. And then he talks about the extent to which this is going to be expensive, and we need to basically be willing to put up the money to make this work, and that quality control is essential. The National Chamber of Commerce much controls this. And he says, as far as freedom is concerned, the threat to the enterprise system is not merely a matter of economics. It is also a threat to individual freedom. It is this great truth, now so submerged by the rhetoric of the New Left and of many liberals, that must be reaffirmed if this program is to be meaningful. There seems to be little awareness that the only alternatives to free enterprise are varying degrees of bureaucratic regulation of individual freedom, ranging from that under moderate socialism to the iron heel of the left or rightist dictatorships. And that, those of you who are listening, is the Powell Memorandum. A suggestion, a proposal that the National Chamber of Commerce undertake a multifaceted war against liberalism in the media, on campuses, in newspapers, in high schools, in textbooks, on speaking campaigns, on television, in radio. In the late 70s, we have the creation of the Heritage Foundation. We have the emergence of Fox News. We have the discussion programs on radio and television. We have Rush Limbaugh and the other Rush Limbaugh spin-offs in terrestrial talk radio. I would suggest to you that all of this, all of what has happened since the 1970s, during the era of Ronald Reagan and thereafter into the 90s and into the early 20th century and the administrations both of Clinton and George Bush, that the things we take for granted today, like conservative talk radio, the Laura Ingrams and the Sean Hannitys and all the rest of them, go on and on and on. All of these things are products of this proposal. This proposal, drafted in the same year that he is appointed by President Nixon to the Supreme Court of the United States as a moderate. I would suggest to you that the United States Senate rejected the nomination of Robert Bork to the Supreme Court. If this memorandum had been public knowledge, I would suggest to you that the Senate might have rejected the nomination of Lewis Powell as well. I would suggest to you that in this memorandum is the reason why there needs to be a virtual center for the study of the U.S. Constitution, why there needs to be a head-on radio network. I would, many of us are uncomfortable with the lack of civility in our politics, in our discussions, in our education, and the rest of it. This memorandum is a call for a reduction in civility because the issue is so serious. All I can say in conclusion is, wow, this is important in today's world, I think. Thank you for listening. I hope that the rest of your week is enlightening. Please be safe. We'll get back together again at the start of next week. This is Bill O'Brien for the Virtual Center on the Study of the Constitution. Be safe, and thank you.